From the Infowars.com studios in Austin, Texas, it's The Real News with your host, David Knight.
It's November the 2nd, 2017. I'm David Knight. We're going to be taking a look at the latest shooting. This one very strange in Denver. A guy coolly and calmly walks into a Walmart and starts shooting at a crowd. 3 people are now dead. They're looking for the man. They don't know who he is. So we're going to have some eyewitness accounts for you on that. And, of course, we're going to be looking at the D.C. collusion. Very interesting, as some of these news reports point out, that we have now lost any news at all about the Vegas shooting. Yes, they can only focus on one, maybe 2 things at a time, and they have moved on. Nothing to see here. But as we pointed out yesterday, still some strange revelations coming out of the police department saying, well, we have now need to tell you that, and here it is, a month after this happened, we need to tell you that there was a firearm discharged in the suite. Of course, it wasn't in his room, and we're still trying to determine how many shots were fired by our police officers in the room, but it was an accidental discharge. And then, as we pointed out yesterday and the day before, we had IntelliHub's research talking about the strange air traffic monitoring and the transponders there, and the strange movements of a commercial flight, Southwest flight, that had been delayed quite a bit of time for no apparent reason, and then appeared to stop and hover and move again right there from the hotel area, with somebody being evacuated from that. So they've moved on. They don't really care about that, but we're going to take a look at some updates about that, as well as some updates on the New York terror and what is going on with the tax reform. That has been pushed off of the front page by the terror in New York City. Meanwhile, fake news has been named the word of the year for 2017. That is the effect of President Trump. And some people would say the effect of President Trump has also not only made fake news the word of the year, but has also really hurt the NFL. I don't think it says President Trump expressed the frustration that people have been feeling for a year. And he used his bully pulpit. And as I said yesterday, it's an interesting contrast to see what the Chinese government has done. That's what a real totalitarian regime looks like. All these people say, well, he shouldn't have said anything about this. Well, he does have a bully pulpit. That is something that a president has always had. He has a free speech just like anybody else, but the president has even more of that in terms of the bully pulpit. He should be a leader. And clearly he understood that people were upset about what was being done with the NFL when he voiced it, and the NFL reacted. And we saw that the NFL commissioner said, how dare you disrespect the NFL? They have seen their sales, or their interest in their sport plummet. They've gone from first to worst, and now even Papa John's is blaming the NFL for hurting pizza sales. He said it's the NFL commissioner's fault. The NFL has hurt us by not resolving the current debacle with the players and the owners. He said NFL leadership has hurt Papa John's shareholders. He says it's a example of poor leadership. Back in 2014, when Papa John's posted a nearly 10% gain in North American same-store sales, they credit it with their close relationship with the NFL. So this isn't just something where they're saying, hey, we got internal problems, so let's blame it on the NFL. No, when they were doing well, they said it was because we're working closely with the NFL. They have individual deals with 23 teams, as well as with the league in general. But yesterday, the tone was quite different. He brought up the NFL 44 times during the discussion, compared with just 10 times last year when he was talking about it. And as you look at other fallout with this, I think this is part of what is happening. Of course, there's other factors involved, but I think it's part of what's happening with people cutting the cord. Understand that the basic package typically includes a lot of sports channels. And we saw ESPN said, we're losing 15,000 people a day. You know, they're losing 1 million people over the various cable providers over the last 3 months. It's not just that people are moving to things like YouTube and Hulu for their movies. It also has to do with the fact that they have bundled in this useless sports package, and people are getting sick and tired of it. Stay with us. We're going to talk about taxes when we come up. You should think about that. We're getting close to the end of the year. I'll be right back. It's November the 2nd, 2017. I'm David Knight, and we're going to take a look at what is going on in Denver. Last night, about 6 p.m. local time, a gunman walked nonchalantly, as they say, into a Walmart in Colorado and just started shooting at the crowd. Two men died at the scene. A wounded woman was taken to hospital where she died. The shooter is identified as a white man who was wearing a black jacket, maroon shirt, and blue jeans. No motive is apparent. They're not sure that they're not treating this as a terror incident at the moment. He opened fire with a handgun and just started randomly shooting shoppers and store clerks. We have an eyewitness account. Let's roll that tape. You got that?
So basically, I was at Toys. I heard gunshots. Well, I thought it was leverage that fell until I heard it twice. I ran outside to the nearest exit. I saw two kids. One of them, I told them everything's gonna be all right. There's just a bad man with a weapon. They were like 10 or 7. They didn't know about these kinds of things. So they were missing their dad. I told them it's gonna be fine. I'm sure he went out another exit. So we just went outside. Everyone was out in the corner.
I was right by when you first come in the main entrance, I had a buggy with me and I was putting little girls' clothes inside the buggy. So I was right there. And there was another lady standing next to me. And right behind us, you could almost feel it, like it's like just right behind you. At the entranceway, we heard one shot, but you couldn't tell whether it's maybe like a kid's gun, because it was like the Halloween section, but not knowing if it's real or not. And then within 2-3 seconds, you hear another one, and then another 3 seconds, you hear another one, and then that's when they just start going off. And I either decided we were going to go to shipping and receiving, or we were going to go straight back. And the only reason why I know that is because I'm a truck driver and I've delivered here at the store several times, so I know where the exits were. And all I could do is just with everybody else, just keep ducking as you're running and just start telling everybody, go to the back, go to the back.
And was it just hundreds of people running at once?
Yes, but it was sad because everybody didn't know which way to go. They didn't know, should they go to the right? Should they go to the left? Should they go straight to the back? Should they go to the shipping? Nobody knew what to do. Everybody was just scared that there were hundreds of people just dropping, just ducking and dropping, because then that's when you hear the screams. That's when you hear the people, that he obviously was shooting.
All right, again, 2 people died on the scene. 2 men died on the scene. 1 woman was shot. They've taken her to the hospital, and she subsequently died, and they have no idea who the individual is or what his motives were. Yesterday at the White House, there was an interesting back-and-forth exchange between Sarah Huckabee Sanders and a reporter. And I want you to hear the question this reporter asks Sarah Huckabee, and she doesn't lose her cool, and she shuts this guy down. Let's run that clip, clip number 4.
What is the definition of compromise as it relates to slavery and the Civil War?
Look, I'm not going to get in and relitigate the Civil War. Like I told you yesterday, I think I've addressed the concerns that a lot of people had and the questions that you had, and I'm not going to relitigate history here.
When you left, and I'm going to ask the question again. And
why don't you ask it in the way that you're apparently accusing me of being?
I'm not accusing. I'm asking a question, Sarah. Seriously, the question is: does this administration believe? Does this president believe slavery was wrong? And before you answer, Mary Frances Berry, a historian, said, in 1860, there was a compromise. The compromise was to have southern states keep slavery, but the Confederacy fired on Fort Sumter that caused the Civil War. And because of the Civil War, what happened? The North won.
I think it is disgusting and absurd to suggest that anyone inside of this building would support slavery. Peter.
That's amazing. It's absolutely amazing to suggest that. And clearly, that is the textbook history that we've had. That was not, it was even in the Ken Burns documentary on the Civil War. You see a black historian say, the white people in the North, by and large, were not fighting to free the slaves. And even if you believe that the common soldier in the South was fighting to keep it, there were other issues. And if you look at what's going on in Catalonia right now, I've said this over and over again, there are movements that happen. This is 150 years ago. There were movements that were far bigger than what was happening here in slavery. And they had in Europe, you had the fight between agricultural interest and industrial interest. the consolidation that was leading to a nation state, all of those were factors. And those are factors that were bigger even than slavery. Slavery was a big economic issue. And of course, you always follow the money, but there were bigger issues. There were issues about open trade or protectionism. And there were issues about whether they were going to have a nation state. And when you look at what's going on in Catalonia right now, and you look at the anger in the streets about the people in Spain, so upset that a group of people would go their own way. I mean, that's the thing. If you stop and look at that, it's like, why is it a problem for people in Madrid if people in Barcelona want to rule themselves? That is something that I've never understood. And when I looked at Civil War history myself, when I read what people wrote, they didn't call Southerners, when they came down to fight, they didn't call them racists. They didn't call them white supremacists. They call them rebels. And even more common than rebels was secesh. They were angry that they were seceding, just as you see people in Madrid now angry that the Barcelonian people would want to secede. Somehow they believe that that diminishes them. And I just, quite frankly, can't understand it. I understand it when the politicians want economic control, when they don't want to see a wealthy area leave their control, just like in northern Italy. You know, Barcelona and Catalonia, they contribute a massive percentage of the economy of Spain, and they don't want to see that go away. And I understand that they want more power over people, but I don't understand the common man in the street and what motivates him. But that's the same spirit that motivated the fight for nationalism. There was a fight to create a bigger nation. That was the zeitgeist of the time 150 years ago. And that was a very big part of this. But of course, slavery ended largely because of the influence of Christianity. Go back and look at the people like William Wilberforce, who said, this is inconsistent with what we are. We need to stop this. And as I've pointed out before, there was slavery in every civilization. It was only because of Christians like William Wilberforce that Christianity ended in Western civilization. But we have to pull down all the monuments of Western civilization. And that's what this constant picking at the scab of slavery in our society is all about. And you just have to understand that we ended it. And you have to understand what forces ended it. And you have to understand what forces were at play 150 years ago. It's exactly the opposite of what we see now. Now we see people saying, we don't want to consolidate into a one world government. We don't want to consolidate into something like the European Union, regional consolidation. As a matter of fact, we want to even break away from the nation state because it's not serving us well. But they continue to push this issue because they have a different agenda with this. And when we come back, I'm going to play a clip for you of a Super Bowl champion who started talking about how the Democrat Party has treated blacks for several decades. He's not deceived by what is going on right now. But this is something that has, they're always trying to manufacture some kind of controversy out of this. And of course, the context of Kelly's remarks were the questions about monuments that were being removed and about Robert E. Lee. And you have to understand that it isn't about Robert E. Lee. Whatever you think about Robert E. Lee, if you knew anything about Robert E. Lee, you would understand why people were building monuments to him. When he was a cadet at West Point, and that's where Kelly is coming from, they called him the Marble Man as a cadet because he never got a demerit. He did everything right. The guy was a man of outstanding character and genius. The North wanted him to lead the war. He refused, and that was what Kelly was saying, because his loyalty was to a different political entity, and that was the local government. And we see people moving back to that mindset, not a mindset of slavery, but a mindset of independence and a mindset of self-governance and a mindset of local governance. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're going to take a look at the diversity programs. Not just the diversity immigration lottery that they've been holding, which is what brought us the New York City shooter. But of course, we're going to take a look at the diversity games that are being played by the Democrats. You just heard that back and forth, that game that's being played in Washington, trying again to say we need to destroy Western civilization because we had slavery in the West. We had slavery in America. And as I pointed out, take a look at Native Americans as you pull down the statues of Columbus. Understand that indigenous people had slaves. They enslaved each other, and it was Christianity that stopped slavery. You still see it, where you don't see the effect of Christianity. You still see it in many ways throughout the world. And understand, as I point out, the Indian tribes, even the Cherokee, had black slaves. They took the black slaves with them, as bad as the Cherokee were treated by the U.S. government. And the being relocated from North Carolina to Ohio. When they moved, they took black slaves with them. And they even had a slave revolt within the Cherokee Nation. And this is the history that is not taught, because we have to demonize white people. But of course, there was a time when the Democrat Party was all about demonizing black people. And we're going to have a Super Bowl champion explain that to us, because we seem to have forgotten that. We've had Dinesh D'Souza talk about that. Other people, we've talked about it quite a bit here at Infowars. It's always been a party of identity politics, hasn't it? That's always been at the forefront of what they do. It's just now that they're kind of shifting the colors around in their crayon book. Before we get back to the news, before we get back to Burgess Owens, who's the one who was talking, I want to remind you of some of the new sales that we have here at InfoWarsStore.com. We have a 25% off DNA Force sale at InfoWarsStore.com. That's a big discount because that's a very expensive product to make. BioPQQ, the main active ingredient in that, costs $30,000 per batch. So it's very difficult for us to do that, very expensive. It's a premier product, so 25% is a big discount there. And of course, what that does is that helps the health of the telomeres, the things that keep your DNA from unraveling. Just as I pointed out yesterday, it's like the little tips of your shoestring. People can look at the length of your telomeres and predict what your life expectancy is going to be. So it's very important to make sure that you maintain that as being healthy. And there's a lot of studies. You can find that if you go to InfoWarsStore.com. You can find links to the research there. Also, we have Biome Defense 50 Probiotic. That is now 25% off. And we still have 50% off Brain Force, 50% off Silver Bullet, our colloidal silver product, and 50% off Winter Sun, our vitamin D liquid supplement. You can also get 16% off Vitamin Mineral Fusion Drink Mix at checkout when you enter the code VITA10. That's 16% off. Our Drink Mix Vitamin Mineral Fusion Drink has a lot of essential minerals and vitamins. You can get them in a liquid format. Great tasting. If you just mix it with water, you can mix it with anything you want. You don't have to take a lot of pills. You can get your vitamins and minerals that way. 16% off Vitamin Mineral Fusion Drink at checkout when you enter the code VITA10, V-I-T-A 10. All right, let's go to what Burgess Owens said about the long history of racial politics of the Democrat Party. Here's what he had to say.
Well, Donald is, again, we're debating the head of our party. Let's do this. Let's look at the heart and history of our parties. The Democratic Party has been anti-black for over 150 years. It was the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, that fought against slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, KKK, the Davis-Bacon Act. There's a listing of things that our party has done very, very well at. And all I'm asking for Americans, give black conservatives a little bit of time. Give us 4 years for us to get our message out to our youth. We will mentor them. We'll educate them. We'll hire them. We'll teach them to dream big, which the socialists, the Democrats have not done for decades. If you want to see the vision of the Democratic Party, go to Ferguson, Charlotte, Baltimore, every place you see failure and misery, you see the vision of the Democratic Party. Give us a chance, and I promise you that together we can make this thing happen. You'll be proud of the black race for standing for principles and values first.
Okay, that was Burgess Owens, and of course he's a Super Bowl champion. You know, one of the things that came out in just the last couple of days, and of course they did this prank, this is a 4chan prank, and it illustrated a great truth, I think, about the Democrats, about the media, about this political correctness and identity politics that has overwhelmed our country. And what they suggested on 4chan, they said, on Halloween, when you can dress up in a mask so that nobody can see you, go around and put up signs that say, it's okay to be white. I mean, is that racist? This is a report from WorldNet Daily, WND. There's a manhunt, they say, or a woman hunt, depending on your gender preference, or maybe it's just a person hunt. Maybe we should call it a person hunt. I don't know. For quote-unquote racists who put up signs, it's okay to be white. Because it's not okay to be white anymore. Because the Democrats, they used to play the race game with black people. Now they have flipped, and they're playing the race game with white people. And so they came out and said they found these signs in Massachusetts, Ohio, Louisiana, Washington, Alabama, Canada. people had the audacity to terrorize by posting signs and stickers that read, "It's okay to be white." And it all started on 4chan because, you can see this is spread out all over the U.S. and Canada. It was an idea to troll the left, to troll the universities, to troll the media that are trying to push a race war. And they demonstrate that there's a double standard and discrimination. They said would-be trollers were encouraged to print out signs and anonymously post them, particularly on college campuses, while wearing Halloween costumes so they could avoid being identified. According to the plan, they said, the next morning, the media goes completely berserk. Normies tune in to see what's going on, see the poster saying it's okay to be white. The media and leftists frothing at the mouth. Normies realize that leftists and journalists hate white people, so they turn on them. Credibility of far-left campuses and media gets nuked. Massive victory for the right and the culture war. Many more our guys spawned overnight. And basically, it worked. There are people that are flipping out in all these different locations saying we got to pull these signs down. We've got to find the people that put them up and somehow punish them on university campuses because we can't have that. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see the change, too, the contrast of what's going on here in America as you've got college kids here in America turning hard socialist, turning communist. And in China, it's going the other way. In China, the government is concerned there because people are rejecting the Communist Party's propaganda and the government is freaking out. It's what I was talking about yesterday, about the NFL wars. In China, the government is they've already given people 3 weeks police detention. Now they're talking about giving people 3 years in prison if you disrespect their national anthem. And as I said yesterday, that's a difference in the way that we handle these things. In America, a free market, people are free to express their opinions, and if they don't like what somebody like the NFL is doing, you just don't buy their product anymore. You don't watch them on television, and you don't even buy the products of the people who sponsor them, like the pizza companies. And so they have to say, hey, we're breaking our ties. I want everybody to know we're breaking our ties with the NFL. Please buy our product again. But in China, the communist dictators throw you in jail. See, that's real censorship. That is what the communists do. And people in China, the young kids in China, understand that, but not here in America because they've got them deceived by this racial preoccupation, this racism they're selling. Welcome back. We talked about yesterday the fact that Donald Trump Jr. put out a tweet, showed his daughter with Halloween candy. So we use that as a teaching lesson to teach our kids about socialism. And so I took half the candy and I said I was going to go give it to some kid who didn't bother to go out. And I said at the time, I said, my wife and I used to do that with our kids, except we taught them a lesson about taxation. As they would start to eat their candy, we'd say, wait a minute. I'm going to take a bite first. We'd eat half of it and then hand it to them. That had an impression. And now he's been taken to task by Stephen Colbert, who wants to lecture us about how wonderful socialism is. Here's Stephen Colbert.
Last night, Don Jr. tweeted a picture of his young daughter holding her candy bucket and said, I'm going to take half of her candy tonight and give it to some kid who sat at home. It's never too early to teach her about socialism. On Halloween, kids literally go door to door to get free candy from the neighbors because the kids don't have it and the neighbors do. That's socialism.
No, it isn't actually. Socialism, and that's why we talked about it as force, because socialism basically isn't charity. It's somebody sticking a gun to your head. When Hillary Clinton first tried to take over our health care back in the early 90s, after she became first lady, that gave her the authority to try to reorganize our society somehow. We had Democrats in our congressional district. Of course, we lived in an area that was very liberal, and the congressman was David Price, a hardcore socialist. And so he had dog and pony shows to try to convince people that we needed to turn over all of our health care, single-payer system, to be run by the government. And I remember getting up at the meeting and saying, I'm all in favor of charity. And before I could even finish the sentence, I got roundly booed by all the socialists there. They don't consider it to be charity. They consider it that they're going to help themselves to what you've got, but they do it at the point of a gun. And that's why my wife and I talked about it being taxes. Because whatever they do with the taxes, whether they use it to hand it out to other people or whether they build roads or whether they start a war somewhere else, it's usually about warfare and welfare. And so we talked about it was taxes because it's about the force. It's about not having a say as to what you're going to do. But I think it's also interesting. There was, I think it was on Zero Hedge, there was an article that I saw. They said, Halloween illustrates the free market because you are not forced to give kids candy. You do it because you like to do it. You like to see them in their costumes. You like to participate. If you don't like to participate, you can turn the lights off. You can lock the house up. You can put up signs, go away, no trespassing, get off my lawn. You can do all that stuff, right? You're not forced to participate in Halloween. It's voluntary. And so you could look at it as a charitable contribution, or you could look at it as candy paid for services received. Kind of an amusement service. Oh, look at this. Look at this costume here, this little kid. I find that amusing. Here's some candy or whatever. I mean, that's basically what's happening there. It's a voluntary exchange. Again, that's why we talked about taxation, because there's nothing voluntary about taxation. In spite of what the letter from the IRS commissioner that always accompanied the paper form said, we thank you for participating in our voluntary program here. Oh, you don't participate. They're going to send them in with guns around. Because that's what they're about. But they always go to the comedians, don't they? Maybe we should start calling the Democrats the comedy party, or just call them commies for short. But they use these guys as court jesters for their Politburo, because that's the way these guys operate. So Hillary Clinton naturally goes onto the Trevor Noah show to talk about the dossiers and Russian collusion. And here's what she had to say. She said, of course, there's a difference between the dossier and collusion. This is a new interview. She argued that the controversial and unverified dossier on President Trump, reports The Hill, that her campaign helped to fund is not equivalent to the Trump campaign possibly colluding with Russia to meddle in the presidential election. Yeah, I would say that it is not equivalent because, first of all, there's no evidence of Russian collusion. And there still isn't after a year. But we do know that about Hillary Clinton. So we do know that she was involved in some dirty skullduggery here. And as we're starting to get this information about Fusion GPS, I find this very interesting. And I don't really know how this sets with Democrats, quite frankly. The Fusion GPS guy was paid $168,000 for his cheap, filthy work of fiction. And I think dossier is too sophisticated a term for this. They really just need to call it not a dirty dossier, just call it a filthy file or filthy fiction. That's even better. So the filthy fiction that this guy wrote, he got paid $168,000. Guess what? The company got paid by Clinton and the DNC. They got ripped off by that middleman, by Fusion GPS. They paid Fusion GPS $1 million, and they only paid the spy, Christopher Steele, $168,000. Now, why aren't the Democrats complaining about exploitation of the worker? You know, they're Marxists. They don't like that kind of thing. This guy only got paid, he did all the work. He only got paid 17%. I mean, that doesn't seem like a very fair shake. and I think as we look at this, and we look at what's going on with the uranium deal at the same time, maybe what we should, I think Fusion GPS is maybe not the right name. Maybe we should start calling them fission, because it was all about the corruption, and we need to tie them into Uranium One. That's the reality. So let's call them Fission GPS, because they were working with fissionable material. And we now find that this uranium that was coming from Uranium One, it was bought by the Russian-owned Rosatom. We find that the conditions on that sale, as reported by The Hill, were that there was not going to be any export of uranium, none whatsoever. That's what the Obama administration told us. See, they were looking at this deal and they were investigating the corruption of this company, and yet the committee that Hillary Clinton and Timothy Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, and Eric Holder, the Attorney General, all on, they were investigating this company, whether or not they were appropriate, whether or not this sale was appropriate. And the FBI had been investigating them for criminal charges for 15 months. They covered all that up. And then Robert Mueller and his FBI covered it up, and then they made sure that they got a non-disclosure agreement from the individual involved, closed everything up. Very interesting. Very interesting. That all happened under Robert Mueller. But now we find that even though they put out a press release at the time from the Obama administration saying no uranium produced at either facility will be exported, that wasn't true. That wasn't true. That was one of the things they were doing to assure everybody that this is okay. They were saying, this company is on the up and up. It wasn't. They knew it wasn't. They knew it had been investigated for 15 months. The FBI covered that up, obstructed that. I mean, how come Robert Mueller is not being investigated is what I want to know. I've said this many times. He's the guy who should be investigated. He should be answering charges about Russian collusion because of covering up this investigation and the corruption of this company. But they said at the time from the Obama administration, said nothing will be exported. And then a year later, they said neither Uranium One or AMRZ, the parent company, holds a specific Nuclear Regulatory Commission export license, an NRC license. In order to export uranium from the United States, Uranium One would need to apply for a specific NRC license and obtain it, authorizing the exports of uranium for use in reactor fuel. But they never issued an export license to the Russian firm. And they say, The Hill says, a fact so ingrained in the narrative of Uranium One controversy that the Washington Post talked about this on Monday. Said, look, they never send any uranium out, but now The Hill has done an investigation. And we got to take a hard break, but when we come back, I'm going to tell you what they found. Yes, I'll tease it for you here. I'll do a spoiler alert. They actually did export it, and I'll tell you how they did it. Because, of course, being Clintons and crooks, they don't do it in an obvious way. They've got a very circuitous route. Welcome back. I'm David Knight. Before we get back to the news, I just want to remind you of some of the sales that we have here at InfoWarsStore.com. We now have 25% off DNA Force at InfoWarsStore.com. That's a big discount monetarily wise, 25% off. That's one of our premier products. Also, we have Biome Defense 50 Probiotic, 25% off. And of course, that is live probiotic cultures from 23 different strains. It's known to support digestion and intestinal function. It's very important for you to have good gut health, to have good probiotic bacteria. You know, sometimes when you're sick and you take antibiotics, it kills not only the bad bacteria, but the good bacteria that you need. So that's an important time to resupplement and do something that's going to help your gut bacteria. That's now 25% off. That's Biome Defense. We also have 50% off Brain Force Plus, 50% off Anthroplex, and 50% off Silver Bullet, our colloidal silver product, and 50% off Winter Sun, our vitamin D product. And you can get 16% off of Vitamin Mineral Fusion Drink Mix, a great way to get the basic mineral and vitamin supplementation without taking a lot of pills. It's a great tasting drink mix, and of course you can make it taste any way you want. Now you can get 16% off of that. Just enter the code VITA10, that's VITA 10 at checkout to get 16% off Vitamin Mineral Fusion Drink Mix. Now, as we went to break, I was telling you about Uranium One and how the Obama administration lied to everybody and said, well, don't worry, we've checked them out, and we've got the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, we got the Treasury Secretary. All these people have vetted this organization. Of course, it was a criminal organization. The FBI, Robert Mueller's FBI, knew that. They kept that secret from the public, and they gagged the individual who was blowing the whistle on that, told him you can't tell anybody, and they threatened him with jail last year when he was going to bring it up in the presidential campaign. That's the FBI for you. That's the corruption at the top, and that's Robert Mueller. And if you want to talk about somebody lying, they just came after George Papadopoulos, and I'm sure he probably lied to the FBI, as I pointed out. He was padding his resume on social media and elsewhere, talking about how he's an oil and gas expert at the Hudson Institute. And they said, this guy was a unpaid volunteer, unpaid intern. And then he goes to the Trump campaign. He said, hey, look at me. I'm in a picture with the foreign policy people. And he was an unpaid volunteer there as well. But they thought they had something, and I don't know, maybe they did get him to say something to somebody. But the key thing that they got him for was lying to the FBI. Who would think that a guy who pads his resume everywhere would lie to the FBI about something and get caught in it? So we'll see what happens with that. Nevertheless, why isn't it a crime when the FBI and Hillary Clinton, Department of State, the Attorney General, the Treasury Secretary, when they all cover up the crimes in a very big uranium sale, and then threaten to punish anybody who would make this public? Why is that not a crime? Why does that guy then become the special prosecutor? And by the way, as I pointed out yesterday, that special prosecutor law went from 1978 to 1999. It was not renewed. There is no law that authorizes a special prosecutor. When they created that law, they took it all the way to the Supreme Court. They said, wait a minute, is this even constitutional? Supreme Court said 8-1, yes, it is. Antonin Scalia dissented in that. And people looked at that and said, you know what? Even though the Supreme Court said 8-1 that it is constitutional, we don't think it's a very good idea. He made a very good point that what they're going to wind up doing is investigating the man and not the crime. And what do we see happening today? That's the reason they let this expire in 1999. So there is no special prosecutor law. And if there was a special prosecutor law, they had set up a completely different mechanism. They actually had some oversight. It wasn't that some guy who was acting in the Deputy Attorney General, who, by the way, was also around with all this Uranium One stuff, Rosenstein. It wasn't just a situation where the Attorney General would appoint this guy. No, there was a 3-judge panel of independent oversight. And they were constantly having to provide, the special prosecutor constantly have to provide reports to this 3-judge panel. And if you wanted to extend it, he had to be very specific about where he was going to go. Now, Mueller is just going into Trump's financial operations and everything. So this is out of control, totally out of control. As we pointed out yesterday, and we got a video, we went into more detail with it. We said Mueller has gone rogue. Well, he went rogue a long time ago when he covered up the Uranium One purchase and gagged everybody about it. But as they were telling everybody at the time, no uranium produced at the facility could be exported. And then they doubled down a year later. They said they would have to get an export license. They'd have to apply for it. They would have to obtain it from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And that hasn't happened. But this is how the Clintons did it, or the people, the crooks, I should say, because they weren't involved at that time. They'd already got their cut. They'd moved on to their next crime scene. But the people that they were concerned about, the way they did it, the Hill found out Uranium One exports flowed from Wyoming to Canada and then on to Europe between 2012 through 2014. The approval involved a process with multiple agencies. Rather than give Rosatom a direct export license, which would have raised red flags inside of Congress that was already suspicious of the deal, the NRC in 2012 authorized an amendment to an existing export license for a Paducah, Kentucky-based trucking firm called RSB Logistics Services to simply add Uranium One to the list of clients whose uranium it could move to Canada. So with just that little quiet behind-the-scenes amendment, without giving them an export license, they just said, oh, we'll just add their name here and nobody will notice. And they did. So they did it illegally. They did it secretly. And then as that uranium went to Canada, then it eventually went to Europe, and who knows where else it has gone. They haven't followed the trail beyond that yet, but it traveled at least that far, they know. And of course, they were able to hide their criminal actions from Congress by doing it that way. See, that is how this is so incredibly corrupt. Why is this not being investigated? We got an attorney general who is still preoccupied with pushing back on states that are legalizing marijuana. Why don't you get interested in this criminal cartel, this racketeering group, and what they did with uranium? Because it goes to the very top of Washington, and maybe that's why. Maybe they're afraid to confront them directly. Fusion GPS, it's interesting. I talked about it in the last segment. They got $1 million from Hillary and the DNC, and they only paid their fiction writer 17% of that, $168,000. So there you go. I guess the Democrats are complaining about not having a fair compensation because they know how much they rip people off. And So, whether you want to call them fission GPS because of your uranium connections with the Hillary and the DNC, or maybe just call them fiction GPS because they've been doing this a very long time. The Democrats have been using fusion GPS to smear people throughout the years, even going back to the Romney election back in 2012 when Romney was running against Obama. Breitbart points out that in May of 2012, they hired Fusion to smear somebody who had contributed money to Romney's campaign. They say Idaho businessman Frank Vandersloot became the target of a smear campaign that was conducted by Fusion GPS. It was disclosed that he had donated $1 million to a super PAC that supported Romney. Obama's campaign website teed him up in April as less than reputable donor. They said, we got 8 of these guys, and here's one of them. And why was he less than reputable? Because his wife had donated to an anti-gay marriage campaign that had been passed in 30 or so states. So that alone, just like you've got the Southern Poverty Law Center saying if you are a Christian group and you talk about traditional marriage or you're opposed to homosexual marriage, that makes you equivalent to the Ku Klux Klan. That makes you a hate group. And, of course, Obama was pushing that as well, and he pushed it through Fusion GPS. But then they were also used to push back against the Center for Medical Progress. These are the people who did the undercover videos of Planned Parenthood, talking about how they would work with people to procure whatever kind of body parts they wanted from the babies that they were killing, the unborn babies. And so to push back against that, Planned Parenthood hired, guess who? Fusion GPS, or fiction GPS, I guess we should call them. And what they did was they went through and they analyzed the videos. And they said, well, we think they've been deceptively edited. And remember, at the time, Center for Medical Progress then said, you think they have? All right, here's the total unedited video. And they put it out there so that everybody could see. But of course, it was the narrative, the fictional narrative that was created by Fiction GPS that the press paid attention to. They just went with the highlights, just as they edit your interview. If you don't do a live interview with them, if you make the mistake of going in their studio like Megyn Kelly did with Alex Jones, and we busted them on that, that's what they always do. They always edit it down and distort it, and that's the story that the mainstream press will go through. That's what Fusion or Fiction GPS did to the Center for Medical Progress in defense of Planned Parenthood.